it's just nice to be invited to share what we've done within an Aneurin Bevan Health Board on trying to get a collaborative approach to respiratory prescribing. Oops. And this is the first test, so I might be better at respiratory than technology. Where am I? There we are. Oops. Okay. So, an Aneurin Bevan Health Board, most of you are probably aware, but despite its geographical size, we are the second largest health board in Wales, and we're made up of 12 clusters in 5 localities, and we've got quite a wide range in deprivation, from the leafy affluent areas of Monmouth to some of the most deprived areas in the UK in Blaen y Gwent and some parts of Caerphilly. And we've got a population of about 608,000. Done it again. Right. Oops. Sorry about this. Okay. So back in 2015, AWTTC produced this report, which was looking at benchmarking respiratory prescribing for the health boards in Wales, and also benchmarking against the northeast of England. And from this report, we saw that we were the second highest, we had the second highest cost per population in our respiratory spend. So we were spending 17.2 million on respiratory drugs in 14-15, and we had a greater use of high-dose inhaled corticosteroids. Now, I've said that we're quite, we've got some quite deprived areas. So with more deprived areas, you might think that we've got more severe disease, so we could maybe justify some of that spend. But when you looked at our asthma prevalence, our COPD prevalence, proportion of smokers, and the percentage of the population that was living in the most deprived areas, we weren't the top of those. So there was obviously something else that was contributing to our higher than average spend and higher use of inhaled corticosteroids. And more importantly, spending all that money and using these high-dose corticosteroids wasn't keeping our patients out of hospital. So what else was driving the variation? So we thought that maybe incorrect diagnosis, so were people, if they had the wrong diagnosis, they're on the wrong pathway, they're being treated with the wrong drugs. Lack of knowledge of the guidelines, so many products, especially in the last few years with all the new inhalers that we've had. It's hard for sort of respiratory specialists to get their head around it, let alone your just practicing GP, pharmacist, nurse. Lack of knowledge of the equivalent potencies of inhaled corticosteroids. I did a project, an IQT project, back in 2013, and it was quite evident from that patients were being stepped up inappropriately. So they were on a low dose, meant to step up to the next rung of the ladder, but they were going straight to high doses. And some prescribers believing that Seretide 50 was a paediatric dose and the adult should be on the Seretide 250. Incorrect inhaler technique and failing to check adherence before titrating up. And if these patients are then coming back, they're more symptomatic, what happens? They get pushed further up the pathway. And then in asthma, failing to step down when it's appropriate to do so. So over the next couple of slides, we'll see that some of that is actually, we felt that was driving our variation. So some of you may have seen this already, the London Respiratory Network COPD Value Pyramid, and the work that they've done has shown that at the base of the pyramid, these are the low-cost, high-value interventions, and at the top of the pyramid, high-cost, low-value interventions. And we knew from our work and sort of some previous work that we had done that within our health board, we had quite a high percentage of our COPD patients who were classified as mild to moderate, but on triple therapy, which wasn't really in line with any, whether it's NICE or GOLD guideline. And also there was, in terms of pulmonary rehab, we know that can improve quality of life, it can help with anxiety, and it can help with exercise tolerance. But within our health, there were long waiting times, and service wasn't equitable across the patch. So we felt that there was a real opportunity here. There's no more money coming in, so we wanted to do more pulmonary rehab, but how could we do it? So it's shifting the money from the top of the pyramid and putting that back into that bottom of the pyramid is what we had as a plan. And then some other benchmarking work that we did. So we knew that we sort of looked at our high-dose inhaled corticosteroids, and we did this as one of the QOF medicines management audits. And this was done in just over 1,000 patients. And in the patients that were documented as well controlled, so that were maybe eligible to be stepped down, only 28% were stepped down. So we knew from this audit that we had patients who were being kept on higher than necessary high-dose inhaled corticosteroids. But the problem with this is that only 79% had an annual review recorded in the previous year. And it wasn't really the fault of the practices, because they were inviting these patients to have review, but they were DNAing. So if they don't come in, how can we address these issues? How can we address inhaler technique? How can we address sort of stepping down, etc.? And then the National Review of Asthma Deaths. This report was quite stark reading, and we decided to benchmark our practice against this. So this was a much bigger audit, looking at 41,800 patient records. This was like a sort of read code extraction that we did under the Medicines Management Action. And again, you can see huge variation across the different localities in brackets. And again, when we looked at a bigger cohort, our patients who were attending for annual review was even less, that we had only 40% on average of our patients who were having inhaler technique checked, and that there was some overuse of inhaled relievers and underuse of their preventers. So you get the picture, and all of this was probably contributing to some of that variation. So in Wales we have prudent healthcare, and we felt then that we could align our issues to principles 3 and 4. So do only what is needed. So no inappropriate ICS in COPD patients. Do no harm. Reduce the use of high-dose ICS in our asthma patients, and reduce inappropriate variation. And not just in what we're prescribing, but also in access to services, and trying to make pulmonary rehab more equitable across our patch. So we had some information that we could then discuss with the Respiratory Directorate, and we decided that we needed a plan. So with this, we felt it was important to involve everyone. So not just something in medicines management teams where we decide this, we think this is a good idea, we'll switch this to save some money. We felt that it was bigger than that, and we needed everyone's input. So we had consultants, GPs, pharmacists from primary and secondary care, nurses, and patient advocates in the form of representatives from the British Lung Foundation. And we discussed the AWTTC report and also some of that intelligence that we had gathered, and decided that really we needed to do 3 things. We needed to generate some cost savings, and we had a real opportunity here because at this time was when all of the new inhalers had started to be to come into the market, and for the first time we were getting new drugs that were actually less costly than what we've had before. Normally when new brands come to market, they come in at a premium, and this wasn't the case with the inhalers. So it was and some of them were, their advantages were that they were potentially easier to use than what we've had before, and equally effective. So we had a real opportunity to do something with that. And the other thing that we did was we employed an invest-to-save nurse who worked alongside the pharmacy team. She was a respiratory nurse specialist from secondary care, and she worked alongside the pharmacy team to implement some of these switches, but also act as a mentor to some of these practices who were high prescribers. We know by using pathways and guidelines that it just makes us or helps us to do the right thing more often. So we try to simplify our pathways and also provide some advice on these dose comparisons for the differences in the ICS potency. And then all of that needed to be underpinned by education for our healthcare professionals and for our patients. So rolling out CPD events, inhaler technique training, etc. So one of the first switches we did was Seretide Evohaler to Flutoform. And we chose that one because out of our 17.4 million, we were spending 10 million on ICS-LABA combinations, and 2.8 million of that was attributable to Seretide 250 alone. And we had the highest Seretide use in Wales. Rather than go with a branded generic, there's sort of Sedupla, which is a sort of direct equivalent, but it doesn't have a product at each of the different strengths. So we chose Flutoform because we felt that if we were trying to get rid of something, that we needed to do it across the board and not just, change Seretide 125 and 250, but keep the 50. Everything was going to go. And with this switch, so it was completed in 63 out of 85 practices. And it gave us the opportunity to review 81% of the patient records. But we were a bit disappointed because when we actually sort of completed this switch, we found that we could only switch 36% of patients. So yes, for that switch, we saved £181,000, but we had predicted to do better. But I think it was because we'd done this as a letter switch, because we were changing MDI to MDI, we had put quite a lot of exclusions within our protocol. So if they hadn't had a review within the last year, they weren't switched. If they were being prescribed Seretide Evohaler for COPD, they weren't switched because we now had Fostair, which is licensed for COPD. Flutoform isn't. And if they were using more than 12 relievers in the last year, we didn't switch because we felt they would need to come in and have a face-to-face review, and if they were palliative. But what we were able to do, so this was in a bit like a value-added switch, because we were able, by going into practices and looking at this data, we were able to then switch 17.6% that were generically prescribed to brand, because it's always within inhalers we would always advocate brand prescribing because there are differences with some of the devices, and obviously by brand prescribing you are then taking advantage of some of the rebates that these companies offer. Also to prescribe a spacer device if they're using an MDI, especially in inhaled corticosteroids. In an MDI device, then we would advocate using a spacer. And we were able to do that for 68% of those patients who had never had a spacer or had an outdated old spacer that had been stuck in the back of the cupboard for about 5 years. And then those patients that were excluded, they were referred for a review with the practice nurse and flagged for overuse of their reliever inhalers. And that was one of the outcomes or recommendations from the National Review of Asthma Deaths report, where patients using 12 or more relievers in the previous year should be flagged for a review. And this is when we thought about developing a community pharmacy asthma review pilot to try and those patients that weren't engaging with coming into the practice for their annual review, whether that review could be done in community pharmacy. And this just shows that although the switch period, obviously we saw Flutoform increase, that has sustained. So sometimes what happens certainly within medicines management, we might go in, we'll do a switch, and then within a couple of years that whatever we've switched to might tail off when everybody goes back to previous habits. And we're not seeing this with some of the switches that we've done. And I think that's because it was across the board. So we weren't just doing it in primary care. Secondary care also did this switch. So the pharmacists in secondary care were doing it through their enabling policy. The consultants were also prescribing, so it just gave more of an encouragement then for GPs to actually prescribe as well. And so some of the other switches that we did at that time was Seretide 500 to either Relvar 92 or Fostair in COPD. So it's probably a bit busy, but it's just an example of our asthma guidelines. So we had an MDI part and a DPI part, and then slotted in at each of the different steps where the different drugs fit, so that trying to stop this inappropriate step up to high doses. And also gave some advice regarding step down, so what the step down process was, to give some confidence to prescribers when they were seeing patients. And I think it's a bit like Non said earlier, in that if patients are stable, it's this reluctance to, well, they're stable, so let's not upset the apple cart. But we know with inhaled corticosteroids that certainly, I mean, we're talking about asthma here, but we know generally that they can cause harm, so that's why we do need to reduce them, if appropriate. So from my IQT project that I mentioned earlier, I developed this dose comparison chart, which was quite well received by some of the nurses, because they felt that they could sort of easily identify, right, what is the inhaler, what dose am I giving, is this a low dose, a medium dose, or a high dose, and whether that product was licensed for COPD or asthma, or both. And then the BTS Sign Asthma Guideline in the latest iteration that was recently updated now have a dose comparison chart there, but without the pictures, and we like pictures. This is an example of our COPD management pathway. It has changed a little bit since we first started it, but basically we felt that the importance of this was that it's device-led. So rather than be prescriptive and say within our health board we should be prescribing this first line, this second line, they're all equally available to prescribe, and it's choosing or finding the device that the patient can use, and then sort of deciding, right, well, which product has got the drugs in it that I need for this patient. And in terms of education, we've mentioned earlier about Invest to Save, our respiratory specialist nurses, and we had one, we've now got 2 more, and they're doing some great work in practices, and probably most of their role is supporting the practice nurse and acting as a mentor. And while they're doing that, they're implementing some of these changes as well. So it's a bit of a win-win for us. We also did quite a few CPD events across our locality, sort of a bit of a roadshow. And I think why we had quite a good buy-in from our sort of prescribing strategy was that this wasn't just about, it's the medicines management team trying to save money. We were trying to save money so that we could reinvest it back into the service, into sort of interventions that mattered. And that was one of the key factors, and I think why this project was quite successful. And not only that, this was across the whole. So secondary care were also doing it as well as primary care. We also involved our community pharmacists by sort of discussing this at the local pharmacy forums. And because we felt that inhaler technique was quite a big thing, really, and it doesn't matter, as we know, what drug is in that inhaler. If they can't use it, it's a waste of money. So we invested heavily into the Advanced Inhaler Technique program that WCPPE run, and we had we've now got 24 accredited AIT trainers who are available to train other healthcare professionals. And what we've tried to do is make sure that there's one in at least each cluster, and so they will be responsible for running a rolling program and trying to get any healthcare professional that's involved in respiratory within their practice to at least do an update once every 2 years. So why do we need inhaler techniques? Probably seems pretty obvious, but this is quite an old study now. Baverstock back in 2010 took 150 healthcare professionals, so that was consultants, GPs, nurses, pharmacists, and gave them an MDI and said, right, how do you use it? And only 7% had all the 7 steps correct and the correct inspiratory technique. And probably what's more alarming is that 113 of those 150 said that they were regularly involved in teaching inhaler technique, but only 11 of those actually got it right. So if we can't do it as healthcare professionals, then it's no wonder our patients are getting it wrong. And again, this was published in the Pharmaceutical Journal 2 years ago now, and it was quite a big study over the past 40 years by Sanchez. And they looked at about 54,000 patients. And in all that time, only 31% of patients with asthma or COPD can use their inhalers correctly. So we need to do something different. And in all the guidelines you look at, inhaler technique is mentioned. And we know if it's incorrect, then there could be at increased risk of side effects, poor disease control, and what happens when they come back and they can't. It's not that if it's not being checked that they can use it correctly, their dose gets escalated, and we're back on this hamster wheel. So choose the device that the patient can use. And this slide, I think, just illustrates some of the inhalers that we've got now within asthma and COPD, and they're not all the same. So you've got MDIs on the top, where the inspiration for that device is slow and steady, and then the dry powders, quick and deep. And how many of our patients have MDIs and DPIs, and are they using the correct technique each time they use that device? And even the DPIs, they're all different. So they have different ways of being primed, ready for use. Which is complex. So in terms of our community pharmacy pilot, so that was, we planned to do it within 1 pilot in each of our localities. Unfortunately, it didn't end up like that, but we piloted it in 2, and 45 patients were reviewed. And it was quite good, really, because in terms of effectiveness, then there was approximately 2.6 educational interventions per patient. So 67% were identified as having poor inhaler technique, 24% identified as overusing their SABA reliever, 22% identified as underusing their preventer, and 31% when they did a follow-up after that intervention showed an improvement in their ACT or their asthma control score. And so now this has been, the pilot now has widened to the whole of Torfaen, so we'll get some more data on that. And I believe that there are moves to try and get this an enhanced service across Wales. I'm sure most health boards do something along these lines already, but again, it's this once for Wales, and so that we can have a robust service. And I think these are in the green boxes are some of the comments from some of the pharmacists involved. And the top one in particular really struck me, because I thought, if you look at that, this patient, okay, he hadn't had a review for quite some time. But on the face of it, if you were just looking at his practice record, you would think, well, he's not coming in. He's obviously okay. He's not being symptomatic. He's not ordering his Ventolin. So we're not really going to worry about him. But in fact, he was getting his Ventolin from his sister. So he was having that, not having any preventer, and he could have ended up as this asthma death statistic if he was left. So our results. So in the first 2 years, when we looked at sort of what our spend was after 2 years, then we had reduced our cost by 7.7% and saved 1.3 million. And we reduced our average item cost in respiratory by 9.2% to the 13 point, can't even read that now, I need my glasses, but it was the lowest in Wales. And then this just shows that the intervention timeline of when we'd started sort of our asthma guidance, when we did the switch. Not all the switches are on there. And really, the COPD pathway seemed to have the biggest impact. So that intervention alone seemed to have the biggest impact on helping to reduce those costs. And although our prescribing strategy wasn't officially launched until February 2016, we were actually doing some of this work beforehand. And just to bring it right up to date, these savings are ongoing, and within the last year, is this the new slide? Yeah, it's 709,000 still saved, and some of the other health boards you can see are making these savings now as well, because we're all trying to reduce this spend and move our investment. And that's on the back of our population increasing, and also our items have also decreased. So in terms of our short-acting bronchodilators, then we're the blue line. You can see that that's come right down, and in terms of our items, it's reduced by about 3.3%. And we were above the Welsh average, we're now below, and there's less variance now between some of our nearest neighbours were, I think, ABM and Hywel Dda, and there's less variance. And we think that, we haven't really analysed this, but we hypothesise that all of that work that we've done, trying to raise this overuse in asthma, has helped to sort of reduced our items. And we're really quite proud of this one. This is the spirograph that we'd used. It probably doesn't, hopefully, where's Helen? Hopefully the new Spiro will get us better graphics and a bit clearer, because it's been quite difficult to put them into presentations up until now. But we were the highest high-dose use of ICS in Wales at about 40%, so we're the yellow line, and you can see that over the course of this project, our use has come right down. So now we're below the Welsh average, and that's just our intervention time. This is another spirograph again, which hopefully maybe it'll be a bit clearer with some of the new updates. And probably what's different to other times when we've done cost-saving switches is that we gained agreement at the outset that if we were going to save this money, we wanted some of it back in respiratory. And so we put a successful business case in. It wasn't easy, but we did have a successful business case approved so that we could have £250,000 of that saving to reinvest in our pulmonary rehab service. So we've got extra sessions that are now happening in Caerphilly. And also importantly, we've now just employed a psychologist that can support the service across Aneurin and Bevan. Focus for 2018-19, then we're looking at triple therapy in COPD. That's one of the hot topics at the moment. We're still looking at salbutamol use in asthma, still more work to be done there, and COPD rescue packs. So when we look at the triple therapy in COPD, then from the primary care COPD national audit, where this data is from, then we know that if we were to switch all of our current triple therapy to one of the new single triples, then we could save between 250 to 400,000 for the health board. It depends on what combination they're on, but that is an opportunity to do that. The only problem with that is that we know that we've sort of mentioned before that some of those patients shouldn't really be on that triple therapy in the first place. So we've also now trying to develop step down ICS in COPD. So in terms of salbutamol in asthma, so we know from the National Review of Asthma Deaths that 39% of patients had more than 12 reliever inhalers in the year before their death, and the recommendation was that if we've got those patients in our practice, then we should be calling them for urgent review. And some of the methods employed to stop that happening is either to just issue it as an acute or to limit the quantity on repeat. So you're not depriving the patient access, but it isn't acceptable to just carry on dishing out ICS in asthma. And I know that the community pharmacy contract this year includes an element of it is going to be looking at those patients, so we'll have some support from our community pharmacy colleagues. The National Review of Asthma Deaths also said that 45% of patients had failed to seek medical help, and 2/3 of the deaths could have been avoided. So we're asking for better labelling. And Dr. Mark Levy, who is a GP in Harrow, he was one of the reviewing panels of the National Review of Asthma Deaths, and he's advocated that we put something like this onto our salbutamol for asthma patients, so that they're not sat at home, puffing on their reliever when they should be going into hospital. And then we've just put some guidance together around COPD rescue packs. This has come out from the primary care COPD audit, which said that we're not recording when or recoding when COPD patients are having exacerbations. Are they true exacerbations? Are people getting rescue packs and then taking them inappropriately? So this is our next thing. So there's a lot of education that's going on around that at the moment, and just helping to do the right thing and in the review and follow-up of those patients, so that we're not just giving out rescue packs just without really reviewing the patients. So just to summarise, so our spend is reduced by 2 million. Our ICS is reduced from 40% to 20.5%. Our reliever inhalers have reduced by 3.3%, and we've been able to reinvest 250,000 into expanding our pulmonary rehab service. So I think we need, from all of this, I think the sort of outcome is that we need to think about value and not cost. And when there's no more money coming into the system, about readjusting and choosing what we spend our money on, and to take a whole system approach and sort of work collaboratively across sectors, and to disinvest in low-value interventions and reinvest where it matters. And I think if we don't work collaboratively, the picture there sort of depicts what could happen. And that's it. Thank you very much.